Guten Morgen, meine Damen und Herren. Ich heiße Christoph, auch CRob. Heute sprechen wir von Metadaten von Schwachstellen. Ich spreche nur ein bisschen Deutsch. I'm CRob. I do security stuff on the internet, and we're going to talk about 54 slides in less than 20 minutes. We're going to smash through this. This is about common standards and frameworks that everyone here that is involved in software development, hardware development, and the vulnerability management ecosystem has to understand and contend with on some level. All right, so that's me, my stupid little picture. I've been doing upstream open source security for about a decade. I currently, for the next 11 days, work at Intel. And don't worry, it's a lot of data. We're going to go quickly. This slide has been provided, should be in SCED. You can refer back to it. And everything here is also citing publicly available frameworks and documentation. Security is very complex. There's a lot of things that especially developers need to be aware of. They might not directly need to do, like they might not need to make a CPE or understand what a CWE is, but these are things that you're going to bump into or hear about as you are going through your software development and vulnerability disclosure journeys. Remember, computers are hard. Unfortunately, I couldn't get my robe onto my carry-on to get over here, and I forgot to bring my towel from the hotel. I apologize for my lack of props. And this is all going to end sadly. We're going to go through a vulnerability management process. The process starts when a reporter reports a flaw to some type of software owner. That issue is analyzed. A fix is developed, then coordinated around with some subset of stakeholders. The collateral is created. That includes patches, documentation, announcements, and then ultimately you have public disclosure. This is a high-level overview of things you will need to contend with within the initial reporter phase. We're going to talk about VDP and bug bounty, and this is when somebody finds something, reports it to a maintainer. There's a lot of different people in this space. You will get security reports from your community, your downstream. You'll get it from your developers on the project. You'll get it from security researchers, academics, maybe evil hackers. Who knows? They generally aren't going to report to you, but you'll hear about that second, third, fourth hand. How they find this? They'll find this through their own testing, like we mentioned, the XZ discovery, that it was found through some performance testing, but you'll generally find these things when you're doing patching and maintenance, anytime during the development lifecycle, sometimes when you're doing pen testing and fuzzing, and a lot of these problems are discovered by accident. After somebody has deployed running software, there's some kind of weird bug, and people start to dig in to understand more. Broadly, the term for your security policy and how you manage that is called VDP, a Vulnerability Disclosure Program or process. If you work for a large commercial organization, you may have a variation of this called a bug bounty program. That's where you have normally a third party will ingest all of your reports, and they will, once that vulnerability has been verified, there will be some exchange of monies. So a lot of people can make a living on finding and reporting bugs to people and getting paid for it. This is a little alien in our community. We don't have, because generally we don't get paid for this stuff, but many commercial enterprises will have this type of thing. We get onto the issue analysis phase. The terminology drastically explodes. We're not going to go over all of this, but I'm going to touch on a couple key points. When the report comes in, the maintainer, hopefully they have a security team or security expert that can kind of read that report. Maybe they get a proof of concept. They're able to test it. They verify, or they get a negative triage sometimes on the report. But they'll go through, do their analysis, and the maintainer or the owner of that software is trying to discover, is this report valid? Does it do what it says it does? Are the consequences what the reporter claims? Because unsurprisingly, sometimes the reporter embellishes the what could and might happen with the vulnerabilities exploited. And this is where we pop onto a term called CVE. CVE is one of the industry standards. It's a vulnerability identifier. It used to stand for common vulnerabilities and exposures. Doesn't stand for that anymore. Today, CVE stands for CVE. Thank you, CVE program. You guys are great. But I could talk about that if you want to offline. But basically, a CVE is a structured identifier. It's a means for everyone within the software and hardware ecosystem to understand this is a specific problem. It has a very unique structure. We're going to show that. CVEs are issued by people called CNAs, CVE naming authorities. That is generally the owner or responsible party for that piece of software or hardware that they are authorized to issue these CVEs. And a CVE is a structure. It starts off with CVE, a date, and then some type of number. And these are unique. So heartbleed, spectre meltdown, there will be one identifier for that, even though that particular flaw might impact Red Hat, SUSE, Windows. There's a lot, even though there might be a lot of different people that are impacted by that, they will all share this common identifier so that people understand, I'm talking about this particular problem, and I fixed this problem with these set of patches. Once the flaw gets analyzed, part of that analysis process is trying to find the root cause, and that's where a term called CWE comes into. That's a common weakness enumerator, and that is a statement declaring this is the real problem behind that vulnerability we just identified. A CWE looks like this, CWE-number. There is a giant catalog of this that you all can go look into. There's somewhere around 200 or more CWEs that are kind of the root causes for hardware and software problems. Then, once you have validated the triage, you've given an identifier, you found the root cause, you want to start to understand the severity. And that's where techniques like CVSS come into play. CVSS is Common Vulnerability Scoring System. Not everyone uses it, but broadly, this is kind of the accepted standard, especially within the vendor community. It's the score. It gives you a description of how that problem works. We just recently went through and updated the CVSS standard from 3.1 to 4.0. So now there are 17 dimensions that we analyze a flaw with. And there's a lot of different things that go into this, and I'm going to scare you on the next page how complex it is. But basically, you look at these 17 dimensions, you typically say this is completely impacted, partially impacted, or not impacted. And then there's an option for downstream consumers to take that score and the string and modify it based off of security controls or things they have within their environment to adjust that score and tailor it to their own environments. So this is what a CVSS score looks like. Everyone fixates on the number. The number is the least important thing about this. The string is more important because this tells you exactly how this vulnerability works, what the impacts are to confidentiality, integrity, and availability, talks about how that attack can be accessed, and also talks about are there impacts to safety now? Are there any user intervention required to make this exploit happen? So this is actually the most interesting part of CVSS, and I generally try to ignore that because a number helps an enterprise prioritize, I'm going to fix this vulnerability before I fix that vulnerability. But a lot of information there, and I want to thank our friends at Red Hat who donated the CVSS calculator for version 4. So you can go there and tinker around, adjust these values, and see how the score changes based off how the attack works. Now, you have identified the problem, you found the root cause, you've given it a severity score. Now you need to understand where the heck is it? And this is where tools like SBOM come into play. SBOM stands for Software Bill of Materials. I don't see Alan running in, so I guess we're safe. This is a machine-readable artifact that describes all of the components that are included within a piece of software or hardware. A lot of different ways this can be implemented. There are 3 different formats SBOMs can be generated in. There are 6 different types of SBOMs. So depending on where you are in the software development and distribution and consumption space, a particular one might be more relevant than another. And then there are several required elements within an SBOM. And at their core, there are 7 required elements that must be in all SBOMs that are common across the 3 formats. All right, So we've done all that awesome stuff. We know there's a problem. We understand where it is and how bad it is. Now we need to start to coordinate. We need to start developing patches and fixes. This is where things like coordinated vulnerability disclosure come in. A common term used within CVD is an embargo. An embargo is a time that a security issue has been reported. It's kept private between the reporter and the owner of the software. And sometimes the owner of that software, they need to bring in experts. They might need help with a specific security technique or tool. They might need help writing the patches. Or if you're like a Linux distribution, you've got to coordinate with a large number of people to help get these patches tested and staged on different hardware configurations, and then ultimately help get it staged for when you go public, it can be distributed to everyone. So an embargo is a time when the information is kept private. Within open source, we keep that embargo time as small as possible. If you report something to the kernel security team, you're looking at between 7 to 14 days, an issue is kept private. When you're looking at commercial enterprises, that is longer. But, so we talk about things within CVD. You have a coordinated release date, a CRD. That's the date things go public. It's also sometimes called a public disclosure date, PD. And unfortunately, I have it here on the bottom, sometimes embargoes get broken. Normally you have a small circle of people that are trusted, that are included in helping evaluate, create, and test the patch. Sometimes mistakes happen, things might get published early, somebody might inadvertently share something in a conversation, so sometimes embargoes get broken, and that's always a bad thing because that gives information to our attackers that they shouldn't have. So everyone included in this embargo has something called need to know. You're included in the conversation because you're an expert on some level. You understand a programming language, a security technique, a tool. We need you to help stage or test patches. You have a specific piece of hardware I need to test on. Boop. There we go. So CVD stands for Coordinated Vulnerability Disclosure. This used to be called Responsible Disclosure. Now it's called CVD. Again, it's about coordination, partnership, and collaboration. And this is the de facto standard of how upstream works, how the vendor security community works. This is an awesome picture that Art Mannion and I and a couple others helped develop. This is an example of a multi-party coordinated disclosure. Depending on the complexity and the scope of where this software or hardware is, this process can be very hard to orchestrate. So if you're ever included in one of these conversations, please be respectful of the rules of the embargo, the rules of the engagement, and understand that there are potentially other people that are depending on you and your work. Boop. All right. So as information is exchanged back and forth during the embargo, we'll typically use something called TLP. TLP stands for Traffic Light Protocol. And like it sounds, has anyone ever seen a traffic light? So the idea is pretty simple. Information will be categorized on red, amber, green, and clear. Oh, the colors didn't show up. Sad. So if something is TLP red, that means you are only authorized to talk about it with the person that shared it with you. You may not share this information any further. Amber, you're allowed to share things on a need-to-know basis, and generally in the later stages of the embargo, you'll see things marked TLP Amber, where I'm looking to get additional assistance, reading in experts. When something's TLP green, it's limited disclosure. So if, for example, you are a kernel developer, there are thousands of kernel developers, so something might be shared TLP green, that you could share that within your community, but nowhere else. And then ultimately TLP clear is when something is completely public, you may share it with anybody. Now we go on to collateral. So we've done all this stuff, we've coordinated with a bunch of people, got a lot of folks involved. Now we get to actually start writing the materials, we're writing the patches, we're writing the advisories. So what's an advisory? An advisory is a way to share that information with your community and the general public. These sometimes are referred to as VDRs, a vulnerability disclosure report. I hate that. I never call it that, but some people that work in the public sector space will use that. One of the formats of an advisory is something called CSAF. My friend Thomas Schmidt from BSI in Germany, he helps head up the CSAF effort, and this is it's a very large format for sharing advisories, but that stands for Common Security Advisory Format. You may be familiar with things like GitHub security advisories, a GSA. That's another example of a security advisory. Security advisories vary widely. There's a lot of different formats and ways that things are shared, but at its core, they will all share the vulnerability identifier, a time and a day that this was issued, some type of product and component ID, so you get some type of identifier. The problem was found here. Hopefully you'll get some type of dependency information. You'll get a description of the issue, and you'll get information about the mitigation, hopefully. Boop. Let's go next. So, I'm going backwards, stop. There we go. A new way to help share vulnerability information is something called VEX. That stands for Vulnerability Exchange. This is a means for a software owner to issue a statement saying, I am affected or not about a particular issue. And this is a nice way to help reduce the noise and work of a project team. Instead of issuing a full-blown advisory while they're doing their work, a project could issue a VEX that says it's under investigation. So I need more time. Wait, please, more information to follow. Things are under investigation. Broadly, VEX has 4 states. You have not affected, affected, fixed, and under investigation. And when somebody selects to say not affected, there's reasons why. I'm not affected because that component is not present in my software. Yay, that kind of stops a lot of customer and community inquiries. Or, the vulnerable code cannot be accessed by an adversary. There are 4 formats or tools, 4 tools for VEX, CSAF, CycloneDX, OpenVEX, and SPDX. Those are all pretty cool ways. You'll start seeing VEX in our ecosystem and much more in the coming years. Now we're at public disclosure, and this is where some of the more advanced stuff comes. Generally, the community isn't going to be as interested or engaged with this specific piece. Once the software has been fixed, the patch has been issued, the advisory's out there, normally the community steps back. But now, for downstream, this information is really critical to them because this helps them evaluate their risk once we're in public disclosure. There is a thing called the National Vulnerability Database, and this is a data source that is commonly used around the world. This is put out through the U.S. government. It is generally focused on products and services that the U.S. government uses, but it used to be kind of the de facto standard for where vulnerabilities were cataloged. There are many other different vulnerability databases, different sources of truth, and our friends at ENISA are working on an analog within the European Union. But essentially, NVD, National Vulnerability Database, is a database of vulnerabilities. Now, for customers, consumers, there's a couple different ways that you can ingest more data to help you do your risk assessment on, am I affected? How quickly do I need to react? EPSS is one of those. EPSS stands for Exploit Prediction Scoring System. This is a data-driven methodology. Based on historic exploitation of vulnerabilities, they give you a prediction of how likely a vulnerability is to be exploited today. It's interesting. There are many different data points that are taken into account. The vendor, the CPE of the product, which stands for Common Product Enumerator. That's a way to identify a piece of software or hardware. We think about things like the age of the vulnerability. We talk about CWE, CVSS. Are there known public exploits through something called KEV, which we'll talk about in a minute? And is the vulnerability available via security scanners? And these guys are all data scientists, Jay and Sasha, and they'll do plots, kind of doing likelihood probability analysis. So a lot of people, a lot of vendors and government agencies like CISA will do EPSS scoring, saying based off of history, this is how likely we think this is going to be exploited, so you should act more or less quickly based off that information. There's another one called SSVC, which stands for Stakeholder-Specific Vulnerability Coordination. This is another way to do risk assessment, do better analysis based off of your context, security controls you have in your environment. It's a decision tree that kind of walks through the vulnerability. There are 5 possible values. If you do not affected, they have some information that's required. And then there's 4 possible decisions. Based off the SSVC analysis, you can track it, that there's no action. You track it star, and that means you have certain characteristics that require more attention. They have attend, which means that you need to address this as part of your normal patching process. And then they have something called act, which means this is a real problem. You should act to do something today about this. KEV is another severity exploitation analysis tool, stands for known exploited vulnerabilities. This is used by the US government. Their focus is software and hardware used within the US government or sold to the US government. So, fact, ma'am. So this is interesting. So if you happen to use and consume some of that software, it's amazing because they tell you there's an exploit in the wild. You need to move immediately. KEV is an advisory style format. It comes in CSV or JSON. And this is, again, if you see something that has a KEV, there is known exploitation in the wild. So if you see this and you have this particular software, you should act immediately because there's a high probability you're going to get, you could get exploited. And let's talk about support life cycles. Sadly, nothing gets supported forever. You should be aware software and hardware you consume generally only gets supported for a period of time. This is a very common thing within upstream where we talk about we support N-1 versions or we support a certain amount of years. There is some legislation involved in the CRA that has some requirements around the duration of that for manufacturers. So you just need to be aware of some of these things. And software that you consume isn't going to be supported forever. So just be aware of that and understand what your alternatives are. If there's something that you're using that has a high severity CVE and has a KEV or something similar to that, that you might need to take action, potentially replace or turn off certain components. So TLDR, security is not easy. It's very important. There are a lot of existing processes, frameworks, standards, and industry groups. Many of these things are not directly done by open source maintainers, but you need to be kind of aware that these are things that happen around a vulnerability disclosure process. And you want to make sure that there are a lot of experts, there's a lot of documentation. Leverage your community, reach out to security experts as you have questions. Find a friend, reach out and try to get help. And overall, don't panic. Every software has bugs. It's how, if you have process and you have experts that can help you, you'll get through it very quickly and smoothly. If you have any questions, this is kind of where I am in the world, and I believe that is my time. Did I do it in 20?